All right, well, take your Bibles, if you would, and turn with me to John chapter 6. We're going to look at something in the Gospel of John, chapter 6. We're going to mainly look at one verse out of this passage, but we're going to look at verses, I'm going to read you verses 1 through 12. We start off with, after these things, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, or the Sea of Tiberias, at different names. A large crowd followed him because they saw the signs which he was performing on those who were sick. Then Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was near. Therefore Jesus, lifting up his eyes and seeing that a large crowd was coming to him, said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread so that these may eat?" This thing he was saying to test him, for he himself knew what he was intending to do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, for everyone to receive a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are these for so many people?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down in number about 5,000. Jesus then took the loaves, and having given thanks, he distributed to those who were seated. Likewise also of the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were filled, he said to his disciples, "Gather up the leftover fragments so that nothing will be lost." Now, most of you have been in church long enough that you've probably heard at least one sermon on the feeding of the 5,000. If you have not, you either haven't been in church for very long, or some of your preachers have been napping on the job, because this is the only event in the life of Jesus before the week that he goes to the cross, what we call his Passion Week, that occurs and is referenced in all 4 Gospels. Everything else, for example, the birth of Jesus is only in Luke and in Matthew. Mark says nothing about it. John talks about something, talks about the coming of Christ in a very different way. But he doesn't talk about the birth of Jesus. That's only in 2. The temptation of Jesus isn't even in all 4 Gospels clearly. This is the only miracle that Jesus performs that occurs, that is recorded in all 4 Gospels. Now we take from that the idea that the Gospel writers all had different perspectives and wrote about things. Luke wrote about some things and gave us details that Matthew and Mark skipped. Mark did some for Matthew and Luke. Matthew some that Mark and Luke leave out. And I think that John sits down to write his Gospel, and he's got Matthew, Mark, and Luke in front of him, and he's going, "Well, yeah, I remember when that happened. Okay, they told that story well enough. I'll tell another one. Let me give what I recall about this." But John chapter 6 gives us, again, the telling of the feeding of the 5,000. And most of you have probably sat there while a preacher walked you through this and talked about how you have to be careful when Jesus asks you a question, realize he already knows the answer, which is worth remembering. And you probably, I remember being a kid in children's church and cutting out 5 round pieces of brown paper and cutting out 2 little fish shapes to remember the little boy with his 5 loaves and his 2 fish, and how it's important to point out even to young children that whatever they've got, if they bring of it to share and put it in the hands of Jesus, that there is no limit to what God can do. And when you study this and you get to talking about it, and talk about the feeding, that there were 5,000 men. It doesn't include the women and the children. And we all know that sometimes children can eat. We've got a boy here whose mama thought he'd need 5 loaves and 2 fishes just for him. Now, God's power is enough to create and make more than anything that we can imagine. There's the parallel here with the temptation of Jesus. The fact that Jesus is tempted by Satan to take stones and turn them into bread. He's tempted to create food. And how at this point, him making food for people is to serve others and is a benefit and a blessing, and it points to God. And it's obedient. And how sometimes there are things that are not of their own wrong, but done in the wrong way, they would be sinful. Done in the right way, they bring glory and honor to God. and how you have to make sure that you're paying attention to what's going on so that you know that. There's a time that, for example, running through the church screaming fire would not be a helpful thing. Anytime that the building is not on fire, it would not be a good thing to do. But if the building were on fire, there is a time that it would be helpful for somebody to come in and let us know. Because of all the places in the building that have smoke detectors, there's not one in here. But I want to point you to one specific verse here that I want us to look at and think about for a minute. And that is verse 10. And this is something that I only really noticed for the first time this week. John chapter 6, verse 10. We look at this passage a lot, and we look at the disciples, and we look at the little boy, and we look at the crowd, and the fact that, there's a big crowd, and it could take 200 days' wages, essentially, to give everybody a little snack. We look at the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and we look at Jesus, but look at what he tells the disciples to tell the crowd to do. He says, tell the crowd, tell the men to sit down. He says, have the people sit down. Now there was much grass in the area, so the men sat down in number about 5,000. Jesus then took the loaves, and having given thanks, he distributed to those who were seated. Likewise also with the fish, as much as they wanted. Now, there are lots of ways to describe the crowd here. You could say to the people, to the men. But instead, John points out that Jesus tells them to give out food to the people who were seated. He tells the disciples to tell folks to sit down, and John records the number, Matthew, Mark, and Luke do too, of the number of men who actually sat down. And I want you to think about that for a minute. We have an unnumbered crowd at the beginning of the chapter, but at this point, we know how many men sat down. We don't know how many men stood there and said, I'm not sitting down yet. I don't know what you're up to. We don't know how many men said, wait a minute, they're passing the word through to sit down and we'll all eat, but all I've seen them with is a little boy with this little lunchbox. I still picture him with a lunchbox. I know he didn't have a lunchbox. Okay, I know that it was probably a sack, a burlap sack, but I picture him, with a slightly rusty metal lunchbox, with his heroes, and it probably with Moses kind of embossed in it, like the Star Wars lunchbox I used to carry to school when I was a kid, except it didn't have Moses. Okay, but that's just what I picture is this kid. I see them; they've got one lunchbox. I'm not sitting down to see what little bit I get out of that lunchbox. What we don't have here is the fact that I think, in all honesty, that there were people there that when the word came from the Lord God to sit down, they would do it. I think that there were people who said, wait a minute, no. Instead of me sitting down, I'll run off to town. I know it would take 200 denarii to feed everybody, but let me run, hey, you and me, we'll go pick up some for this group. Look, 100 people just sat down. We'll feed this 100. We'll take care of these. I think you had some that refused to sit down because they wanted to help instead. I think you had some that refused to sit down because they weren't going to eat if they didn't put the work into it themselves. No, we'll go find something. I'm not taking anybody's handouts. I think you had some that didn't sit down because they thought, well, there's nothing you can do for me. I'm not interested. And what I want you to think about tonight is, are you somebody who refuses to sit down? Now, I'm not saying that there is not a time for you to get up and do your fair share of the work. But so often, spiritually, I think that we miss out on the blessings where God takes what little we have, blesses it, multiplies it to us because we refuse to sit down. We refuse to just stop what we're doing. We refuse to stop trying to help, stop trying to busy ourselves, stop trying to refuse to take from somebody else. Oh, wait a minute, I can't have that. We have to be up and busy. Oh, well, surely there's something I could do instead of actually just going to a Sunday school class. I couldn't, I don't want to sit there and make somebody else prepare a lesson. Give me something to do. I'll go, while Sunday school's happening, I'll go weed eat. And that way nobody else has to weed eat during the week. No. Sit down. Oh, well, I'll go cook while we do this, or I'll go clean this. Sit down. Folks, one of the things that is the honest truth, and forgive me if this stomps on your toes the next time we have a potluck, but if we can't wait 10 minutes to set the food out after church gets out for a potluck and folks got to skip church for us to eat, that's a problem. We can wait. If your blood sugar bottoms out that much, bring a snack on potluck days. You'll be okay. Because I know some people's blood sugar does. But that's always been something that I've never understood in church from the time I was old enough to see 8 people get up and walk out when the preacher started preaching on potluck Sundays. Because they had to go get the kitchen ready. Got to be busy. Can't sit down. Why not? Got to be busy. Going on. Good. I've got a weekend where I don't have anything going on. Ooh, wait a minute. We better find something to fill that time. And then 2 weeks later, we wonder why we're spiritually and emotionally exhausted. Because God gave us a time when we could have sat down. And we refused to take it. Had a rainy day. Couldn't get out there on the combine. And we would have just gotten stuck. We got some work done. And I know that some work had to be done. But you also had an extra 30 minutes that you could have spent just catching your breath. Did you take it? So often we refuse to just sit down and see what God does with what's out there. Oh, there's some guest rookie preacher coming in. Going to preach some little, wannabe sermon as he's just learning. Well, there's nothing I can learn from. I'll go keep the nursery that Sunday. Because you're not going to sit down if you're keeping the nursery. You're going to be running. That's the joy of nursery work. All he's got is 5 little loaves to bring. He's not one of these great preachers. We find something else to do. Maybe if we sit down, we might hear God speak in ways and God work in ways that we didn't expect. Oh, the ladies are going to have a Bible study group. Okay, well, that night, well, I'll do this or I'll do that. Now, ladies, this only applies to you because men, you should be covering the needs while the ladies have a Bible study group. All right, you're not invited. Just get over it. I know it hurts. Oh, well, I'll do this and I'll do that to busy myself that night. Come, sit down, participate. Bring what you have and see what amazing things God does. Men, same thing. Oh, I can't do that. That's the night I've got this, or this. That's the night I watch Dancing with the Stars. Men, guess what? TiVo it. Watch it the next day. You'll be okay. Yet we make ourselves so busy. Or so, I can't do that. Well, I don't have time to participate in a Bible study group. I'm spending 4 hours a day reading my Bible and translating it from the Hebrew all on my own. I have to do it for myself. I can't possibly come and let somebody else help me do it. I can't possibly come and receive from somebody else's work or from somebody else's blessing. I want to challenge you all to think about this. What ways do you need to sit down
and let God work. Because we get it in our heads so often that we have to help Him out. Y'all are the Sunday night church crowd. To a certain extent, y'all are not the ones that I stand up in front of and say, I really wish some of y'all would do something. And it may apply to a couple of you, but some of, for the most part, when I look at the nominating committee list, it's like calling roll for Sunday night church. So I don't think that I'm in danger of all of you deciding, okay, well, I'm not going to ever teach Sunday school again. I'm just going to sit and listen. Because I need y'all teaching your Sunday school classes. Don't get me wrong. But don't over-busy yourself and avoid it. Read through this week several times, and I just couldn't help but picture, because of the way John words this and the way John talks about it. He said to have the people sit down, and then for those who were seated, they served. How often do we miss what God has for us because we refuse to be seated and trust Him? We've got to know. We've got to ask, well, what's going on here? What's going on there? We get so worked up about what the next step in the plan is that we don't stop and see what's happening right here and right now. Some of us wouldn't be able to worship if we deviated from the plan that was in the bulletin, or if we didn't have it, because we wouldn't know what the next step was. Wait a minute. Why did we skip that song? Why did we preach first? Well, maybe the singer needed to warm up. We've got to be willing to trust and live in what God has given us right in front of us. Because when God pours out His blessing, there's more than enough left over. That comes to the last group of folks that I think didn't sit down. And that's the people that I think looked and they were afraid there wasn't going to be enough. They say, I don't want to ask my question in Sunday school because I don't want to get in anybody else's way. I don't want to bring my need and share it with the church and ask for prayer and ask for help because I don't want to get anybody else's way. I don't want to be a burden on anybody. I just want to sit over here to the side and stay hidden out. I don't want to be too much over here. I don't want to be a problem. I want you to think about the fact that some of those people stood back and wouldn't sit down and watch James, Philip, Andrew, Peter, Simon the Zealot, Judas Iscariot, James the son of Alphaeus, all these other guys. Yes, I just failed to name all 12 disciples off the top of my head. Watch them come through with baskets, fill them up with leftovers, and head off downhill. While they stood to the side and thought, now I've got to find my way to a village and get myself some dinner. They watched. And they watched the bounty of God walk away. And I am convinced that many times we come together as a church body. We come together as God's people even on Tuesdays or Fridays. And we go away still hungry and still hurting and still in need and still alone and desperate and frustrated because we didn't want to sit down and say, I need to. Because we wanted to try to be good and leave it there leave it there for somebody else. And we miss the point that God always has enough. God always provides enough. God always sustains enough His people. You will not exhaust the grace of God, the love of God, the riches of God, because you have a need to. You may exhaust the time on the Sunday school schedule, and you may just have to deal with that and talk about it over lunch too. You may exhaust the teacher's guide for your Sunday school lesson, and you may have to go digging it out through a different book and finding the answer another way. But you will not exhaust the depth of the riches of the love of God, and you will not exhaust what is there in the Word of God for you. Don't stand back. Don't stand on the side and say, well, maybe I'll get into this eventually. Go ahead and sit down and say, well, if the Lord provides, I'll eat. If the Lord provides, I'll be fine. And if He doesn't, I'll sit here and trust Him till He does. And then be amazed. Because not only will He provide enough, there'll still be plenty left over. But it falls to us to do one basic thing, and that is to sit down in trust of Him. Let's pray together. Father, we thank You for this day. We thank You for Your love, Your grace, and Your mercy. We pray that You will help us to trust You, to sit down at Your feet, and have faith. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Come to this.